You're tuned in to Women in America, the podcast that dives deep into the issues shaping gender equality in the U.S. and beyond. Hosted by Pari and Eve, public health professionals by day, content creators by passion, we bring you expert insights, compelling stories, and actionable strategies to push the fight for equality forward.
On this episode of Women in America, we're turning the negative into the positive by helping you channel any rage or blues you might currently be experiencing into unconventional but concrete ways to take action. Let's dive in.
I have to admit, I really love a full circle I told you so moment.
Which moment are we talking about here? Because there's so many to choose from.
True. We are talking about the case of 24-year-old Selena in Georgia because she was arrested for a miscarriage. And all of these MAGA clowns are like, no, she wasn't. She broke laws, blah, 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 blah. And we repeatedly said that she did not, in fact, do anything illegal because most miscarriages are just flushed.
Yeah.
And the Georgia State Police had to release her from their hold because of the fact that they had no legitimate charges.
I think their whole intention that people don't realize was just to traumatize her and make an example out of her. Because what we were saying when we were posting about this online and putting it in our newsletter is that they did this knowing that there were no laws on the book about what to do with a miscarriage, right? And that's what they were trying to charge her with, was that it was like, what was the exact wording of the charge? It was like disposal of a body or something. It was like,
A
there's
corpse.
a corpse. There's no laws about what you do with your own fetal tissue in Georgia.
Exactly. The cruelty is the point.
Yes.
And for anyone who wants to be an even bigger clown and come at us being like, well, maybe they didn't know. That's even worse, bro. If your police don't know what the laws are, why are they police?
How are you just arresting people not knowing what you're charging them with and that it's actually not a law? That is, you're right. That's even scarier than if they knew, like, oh my God, it's terrifying. Why is our law enforcement like this?
And the sad part is that that is happening, not just to women, but as we've seen in the last several months and weeks, that people are actually being arrested without due process or charges. In fact, sometimes the cops are not even able to identify themselves properly before they're arresting these people. So I bring this up simply to say that for people now, months into this new administration, to still be defending these actions and not seeing the crazy slippery slope that we have descended on is so blind.
Yeah.
And then when people like you and me, try to present them with the absolute facts, instead of taking a beat and thinking, hey, maybe I need to reevaluate my stance on this, they come at us with blatant lies, which then we get to come back to and say, hey, I told you so.
And they hate that. They get really mad about the I told you so because they're like, there's no room for this. Like, we should all learn from blah, blah, blah. And they double down and are like, no, I still don't believe it. The thing that pisses me off the most, if I can rant for a second, is when they're like, well, she wasn't arrested for a miscarriage. Like, that wasn't the wording. They are never going to make a law about miscarriages are illegal because they can't pass it like that. It's the whole thing behind like finding different ways to ban abortion without saying it's an abortion ban. They will never say we're banning miscarriages. They will do it in every other single way. And the people who like come at us and are like, it wasn't for a miscarriage. I'm sorry, no, you don't have the critical thinking skills to realize all of the things that are going on behind the scenes that are leading us to say she is being arrested for having a miscarriage. You don't take
100%. I'm snapping my fingers right now because that's your brain went in the same place that I was going to go. I was going to say, in order to come to the conclusion that we have, people would need even a half ounce of critical thinking skills. Yes, which seems to be the rarest commodity in the United States.
As they're dismantling the Department of Education.
I think that Selena's case, though, is one of the many things that the reasonable people in this country are super angry about, you know? And I know that a lot of when they talk to me, they say things like overwhelmed, rage,
Mm-hmm.
angry. Like several of my women friends are not sure if they will ever want to get pregnant again simply
Mm-hmm.
because it's dangerous to do so. And that's separate than their actual plans to start or continue or grow their families. So I thought we could focus this episode's conversation about, encouraging ways for people to be able to take action,
Mm.
even perhaps in through avenues that they haven't thought of.
Yeah.
Because I think that oftentimes when people are like, what can I do? The most common answers they get are vote, which is critically important, right?
Mhm.
Like now, there are still local elections happening in certain states, but there isn't necessarily a national call to vote because we don't have a national vote coming up. And then the second one that people often hear is donate, which again, super necessary. I
Mhm.
thought we could maybe share some more diverse ways
Mhm.
of taking action, especially coming off of the National Day of Protest,
Yeah.
because I think there's a lot of energy there. So, how was your experience actually going?
Yeah, it was wild. Um, Millions of people across the
Mm-hmm.
country and in these like blue dot areas where people realize that they're not actually blue dots anymore, that they're like a huge portion of the population. Where I live, it's pretty liberal, so there's always going to be like very strong turnout for protests like these. Um, but the speaker lineup was 10 out of 10 because all the heavy hitters came out. Like congressional members went back to their states to be present for these protests in their states. The signs were chef's kiss. Like people are so creative because they're like, I feel like sometimes creativity comes out of rage. You're just
Mm-hmm.
like, my 70-year-old parents made signs. And
I
like,
love it.
were they original to them? Yes. And they went out and did the best they could in their small town to protest the fucking oligarchy. Like it's I'm so proud of them. And my dad wore a pink shirt, because he wanted to and he wanted to stand out. And I think there was also some like feminist ties there, like on my behalf, but like
Mm-hmm.
it was very joyful
Yeah,
in weird ways.
what were some of your most joyous or rather favorite signs? Like the ones that made you pause and smile?
Yeah, I saw one that I usually see at women's marches, but that is a fan fave every time about like being part of the uterati, like the uterus Illuminati, just because I love this idea of like a secret society of women just like rising up for the cause. And then this wasn't as like fun, but I think it was in Cincinnati, there was a guy who drove through the main part of a protest in his car with a Trump flag on it, obviously simply to for the purposes of antagonizing people.
Oh yeah.
And what I take away from this is just like they are there to fuck around and find out. What was your motivation to just be like, I'm going into a crowd of people who are my fellow Americans, who I know are so frustrated with the way things are going that they are out here on their Saturday in massive volumes to protest the government. And I'm going to drive my car through it with a Trump sign being like, nah, 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 Like, it luckily didn't escalate to the point of like extreme violence, but a lot of protesters came up to the car with their signs and were like, you can go fuck right off. But like, why? Why are you doing that?
I'm not convinced that they see the other half of America as their fellow
I
Americans.
know.
There is like this unfortunately huge chasm that exists now.
Hmm.
And I don't necessarily think that it can be reconciled at present without massive cultural shift at the leadership level, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because divisiveness is the new administration strategy. I know you asked why rhetorically because you do know the answer.
I
They're doing it
know.
because they want the protest to be able to be branded as not peaceful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They want to rile people up. The audacity that it takes to be the person playing the role where you are explicitly walking into a crowd of otherwise peaceful individuals
Hmm.
as an antagonizer when the people who are protesting have legitimately lost their human rights.
Hmm.
They obviously they've also lost their jobs, they've lost probably their quality of life, their affordability, all of those things. But in addition to that, they have also lost things that are about protected characteristics of theirs.
Yeah.
And you are just trying to be an asshole. Like those are the differences, right? Between
Also,
those two groups of people.
yes, but also like it is hard for me to believe in this environment with Trump signing over 200 executive orders. There are very few people in America that have not been touched and affected by at least one of these executive orders in a negative
That's true.
way. So, like, Bob is driving through a crowd of people at these hands off protests, waving his Trump flag, likely not even realizing that he has been negatively impacted himself by something that Trump has done in the last 3 months. That's crazy to me.
Or they do realize and they'll just blame Biden.
Or Obama,
Yeah.
because thanks, Obama. We're still blaming anybody blue.
I saw a video on TikTok this week
Uh,
of this son who was like filming his mom while he was having a conversation with her. And the context he had provided was that his mom is heavily MAGA, only watches Fox News, diehard Trump supporter. And she was complaining to him about the economy tanking. Okay. So she's saying, like, wow, I can't afford anything anymore. Things are so expensive. This sucks. All of my investments are gone. And he was like, well, what do you think caused this? Her response was Joe Biden. And he was like, tell me how. And of course, she couldn't,
yeah.
but it's lends so much credence to, and I'm going to say the C word,
Mhm.
these people are in a cult
They are in a
and
cult.
they have just been indoctrinated to believe this. And
Mhm.
sometimes I frankly struggle with saying that they're in a cult because it makes me feel like it removes some sense of personal responsibility that I believe that they have in order to
Mhm.
be critical thinkers, as we said earlier.
Yeah.
But the impact of the propaganda cannot be discounted. And again, like you mentioned, the protests in some of these cities are huge. There's tens of thousands of people. So they are being orderly, they're staying on paths, but because there's so many people, sometimes you step off of a sidewalk, right?
Mhm.
Because there's no room. And I saw this video of this guy who was in a pickup truck.
Mhm. Oh God.
um, and he gets out of his car holding an AR-15 and starts screaming at people that they are blocking traffic. And if you can just picture what this is like, this guy got out of his truck, therefore actually stopped traffic,
Yeah.
and then is yelling at the protesters for stopping traffic, even though they're just on the sidewalk. And if you are bringing an AR-15 to a peaceful protest, you cannot be arguing with me about your intentions at that point,
Right.
you know?
We were talking offline about the lack of police presence at these protests, which like this lends itself to because it's like, could you imagine if a black man got out of his car or any person of color got out of his car holding an AR-15 at a high tension protest like this?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm going to say is pretty dark, but I would amend your sentence to, could you imagine if a black man? The critical thinking skills in this country are so lacking because I
Mhm.
keep seeing people post bullshit like, oh, this is how protest should be done. You know, it was all peaceful, no problems. This is how it should happen, not the way you guys handle Black Lives Matter, not the way you
Mhm.
guys handle trans lives. Open your eyes for 1 second and give the half functioning brain cell that you have left even a fighting chance,
Mhm.
and ask yourself why there was no police presence at
Mhm.
these protests. Why was there no aggression shown towards protesters? Why across these multiple states across the country? The answer is because the 92% of Black people that voted for Kamala Harris sat out these protests, and therefore the administration's response, the law's response to this protest of majority white faces was extremely different than it
Mhm.
would have been if it was majority Black or even partially Black faces.
Mhm.
And I say this because when I attended the Black Lives Matter protest, several years ago, the National Guard had been
Yeah.
called in.
Yeah.
And that was the first protest my city even had, which means
Mhm.
that there was no justification for the National Guard to be there. And yet the entire way lining the protest path, the National Guard is standing there with gigantic rifles slung across them,
Right.
which even if you are in the best possible mood, that changes your psyche.
It's
You
for
know,
intimidation. Like they are
one
there to intimidate and scare.
100%. And I don't see how any sane, reasonable person can look at those two events and be like, these are the same conditions under which we reach very different outcomes. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
So we were talking about favorite signs earlier,
Oh,
and
yeah.
there were some that made me giggle. I saw this one lady, she said, grab him by the testicles.
Oh, I saw that. I saw one of those.
Yeah, there was another one that said, they're eating the checks, they're eating the balance.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, I love it. It's so good.
In a dark way.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's the thing. If we don't laugh, we'll cry.
We
So,
have to.
but I think that the reason I bring up these funny signs and like the moments of joy that I was experiencing during this protest is because, you know, oftentimes like people will be like, well, protests are just performative. Like, what did you actually accomplish? And I want to pause and suggest to folks that if you have a group of people that are feeling so downtrodden, so full of rage, so overwhelmed, you know, throw back to the words that my friends use when they tell me how they're feeling, and you can collectively bring them together for an afternoon that bolsters their capacity and their ability to continue to engage with the movement, what is performative about that?
Yeah.
You're allowing the average person to be able to take a stand in a way that makes them feel like they have the energy to keep going for the things that they can do in the future.
Yeah.
And that is enough. Like that is all it needs to be, you know? And of course, in the history of America, we have never achieved change without protests. So frankly, calling something like that performative is to ignore all of the previous history and successes we have had. But I also want to ask people to try and look at it purely from like a sense of community perspective. You know, like these people are now typically sitting alone in their houses watching the news, which frankly is just a constant stream of horrendous stuff. And for one day, they got to go out and be part of this national movement of solidarity.
Yeah.
And that is enough.
And I also want to highlight that while the protests are one day, I think we really undervalue and underestimate like what comes out afterwards of people being together during that time. And I don't just mean what you're talking about, this feeling of inclusion and I'm not alone, which is great, but what that feeling leads to. So you are in an environment of millions of people that all presumably share similar values to you. You are out there meeting new people. You are out there networking, even if you don't know it. Even if you're not networking and you're just out there with your friends talking about these issues for 4 hours while you're at this protest, ideas come up about what you can do the next day, the next week. You're energized. You're coming up with ways that you can fight the system. Not everybody does this. Sure, a lot of people go to the protests, have their signs, and go home feeling good about themselves. But I imagine, at least from my experience, and when I go to protests, when I spend 4 to 8 hours one single day talking with people that I don't normally interact with, who are either, friends I see sometimes or complete strangers, that's where the seeds of new movements start. And
For
I
sure.
don't think we talk about that enough as, activists.
Yeah. I saw a few posts online that were asking people in other cities if they saw a lot of young men at their protests, right? Because like all of the post-election analysis that has come out about digital media, about the spaces in which we need to be reaching audiences, the one demographic that has skewed heavily conservative, right, is young white men, or I guess I'd say young men across most racial groups. And a lot of people were sharing photos of, either their sons or their like young partners. It was enough for folks to be able to say, oh, look, like even my son who initially didn't want to go with me now feels a slightly different way about this. And to read these posts and hear that they're saying like even over the course of like a 3-hour event, these stories I was seeing was to say that like, yeah, actually they went in with a very different energy and they came out feeling a very different type of way. So have you now been able to perhaps spark something in that person? Hopefully, maybe. That actually makes me sometimes think about the Cory Booker's
Yeah.
25 plus hour record that he broke. It was a masterclass in researched information, right? His staff would deserve all the kudos. The fact that he was able to go on record sharing these stories of real everyday Americans was what we needed right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because there's two things I want to emphasize. Back to the point that you and I were discussing about things being performative, people were like, well, he didn't like stop a bill from being passed. My response to that is that you cannot call something performative when it is injecting an energy and paving an example for what a party should be doing, right? Like that was a good example, if nothing else, of all the ways in which the Democratic senators
Mm-hmm.
and Congressfolk should be taking action and have not up until this point, right?
Yeah.
And the energy that was being generated online is hopefully going to show those people what they need to be doing to be representing
Mm-hmm.
folks. And I also think that the reason why I bring up Cory Booker is because I want to remind people that when you are taking action in multiple ways, it's very, very easy to discount what someone is doing. Be like, it's not enough. It's not right. I don't agree with it 100%. I would have done it this way instead.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is that one person is doing it and the other's not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what we have to remember at all times is that a politician is fulfilling a job responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
They have different, motivations, incentives to do different things. Ultimately, they are supposed to be serving the people. And we have unfortunately gotten too far away from that. Like too many
Mm-hmm.
politicians don't do that. So
Mm-hmm.
this was a good example of being like, hey, I might align with you on 60% of what you believe in or 80% of what you believe in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to make the personal decision that that is enough for me to commend this action that you've taken because I believe that it is going to build more movement in the future.
Yeah.
You know?
You're never going to align with one politician perfectly because they're their own person, just like you're never going to align with like your best friend perfectly on everything.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like people
Um,
don't even align with their spouses on everything. So like
right.
how can you expect to do that with this elected official, you know? And I say that to not to discount that everyone's opinions are of course valid.
Right.
I'm simply trying to offer that we need to start looking at things in a certain type of way if we want to be able to create real change and action and movement.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the biggest problems that we, the royal we, the
Mm-hmm.
Democratic Party and the Democratic base have is that we fight with each other more than we fight with the other side,
Yeah.
you know? And I think that that is one of our biggest flaws. And
Yeah.
we need to figure out a way to do better at going back to being the big tent party that we used to be while encompassing the fact that at least the left half of America has moved along the progressive spectrum and is much more progressive than we used to be
Yeah.
previously. Yeah.
I think our biggest strengths are also our Achilles heel in the sense that like we are the party of critical thinking. And so doing all that critical thinking, we have all these opinions and ideas of how things should be. Unlike MAGA, who
Mhm.
for a lot of like all intents and purposes can kind of be sheep, and are just like following what the ringleader says and are not critically interrogating what that means and are just like, yes, I will do whatever Trump says.
If you have nothing else to take away from this, take away the fact that he unseated the record of a racist. Right there is enough reason to celebrate. But I would even argue the fact that he dominated the news cycle for 25 hours and gave everyone a reprieve from the asshattery that
Mm-hmm.
we are normally experiencing in a day was like such a breath of fresh air. It was an injection
Right.
of like some sort of energy in a situation where we have become so normalized to receiving bad news every hour that even Signal Gate, which would have previously been the only thing we talked about for 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
now is no longer even in the news cycle.
Yeah.
It was very necessary for there to be something positive,
Mm-hmm.
something that wasn't pinging our cortisol levels all the way up, something that was a little bit different for our psyche, for us to be able to remember what it felt like to experience that. And that to me is reason enough for
Mhm.
Cory Booker to do what he did, you
Speaking
know?
of things like good news that didn't get enough news cycle, do you feel like the judge who won in Wisconsin got enough coverage? Because that was huge.
Yeah, it was. So I'm so glad you brought that up. And I think this is such a good point about media literacy, right? The only coverage that that did receive was about Elon's role in the race, not
Right.
the fact that we just secured a
Mm-hmm.
seat that was critical to protecting our democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that sometimes you have to sort of take the angle to a story where people will be more responsive. But I would actually love for you to provide context to some folks who might not know what we're talking about.
Yeah. So there was a Wisconsin Supreme Court election on April
Mhm.
1st. Susan Crawford versus Brad Schimmel. And it was a contested election because Elon Musk contributed seven figures to Brad Schimmel's campaign because Brad Schimmel said basically that he would do whatever Trump wanted him to do. And the types of state judges that are on the Supreme Courts affect the types of cases that get to our US Supreme Court, right? So if you have a MAGA judge overseeing reproductive rights cases, civil rights cases at a state level, they're going to be the gateways to whether or not, the Supreme Court hears it and the Supreme Court has then the opportunity to overturn a national judicial precedent. So Elon Musk had backed Brad Schimmel with seven figures. And so he was outpacing Susan Crawford, this Democrat who was endorsed by, Planned Parenthood, Emily's List, all of the big players for standing up for democracy, not just women's rights, but democracy.
Mhm.
And so Wisconsin was the first state really since the November presidential election to try to beat this oligarchy that we have found ourselves in. And she won. Susan Crawford fucking won.
Hell yeah.
And it was a huge deal because it was a massive indication that one, voting still works at a time where a lot of people thought that things that happened during the last Trump election was really shady. And that if enough people get out and vote, we can vote democracy back into office. It was a
Yeah.
huge deal. And I wonder how many people listening to us today heard about this. Like, I wish we could take a poll. And if you didn't hear about it, think about why. Why didn't you hear about this massive win in Wisconsin?
Yeah. I mean, not only did Elon pour that much money into the campaign, he even held rallies where he would tell people that if you come to my rally and can prove to me that you're going to vote for Brad or have voted for Brad, I will randomly pick
Mm-hmm.
people to pay $1 million to each, right?
He did that twice, right? He actually did it.
Yeah. And it also wasn't random.
What do you mean it wasn't random?
Well, the people who won, they
Mm-hmm.
looked at their profiles after. One of them was the head of all college Republicans in Wisconsin.
Oh
Just
my
seemed very
God.
interesting, right? And then Elon's lawyer let slip that it was not, in fact, random.
Nice.
Or maybe he didn't let slip. Maybe he wanted to say that because
Mm-hmm.
lawyers are usually very careful with what they say. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway,
Okay.
I think, and obviously that didn't even make the news. Like even someone as informed as you didn't even hear about that
Mm-hmm.
because we have descended into a point in this country where like things that would have previously been the only thing we talked about for their illegality are now just 9 a.m. on a random Tuesday, you know?
Because I hate to say it, but Trump's like flood the
Mm.
zone strategy is working, or what's the phrase? Chaos and something, whatever.
Yeah.
It's working. It's working even on us. Like I can't catch every single news story. You can't catch every single news story. So between the two of us, we get most of it, but that's between two people who are actively clocked in all the time.
The flood the zone strategy is originally Steve Bannon's
Mm.
strategy.
Ugh.
And we know this because he actually talked about it in an interview.
Yeah.
And what I find truly incredible about the MAGA crowd is that even when their leadership will lay out with excruciating detail, whether it's in a 2 hour long interview
Mm-hmm.
or a 925-page document called Project 2025. Their leadership will lay out in excruciating detail all of the terrible, horrible things that they are about to do that is going to affect not just Blue Americans, but all Americans. And everyone is still like, yeah, we're totally chill with this. So not only is it the flood the zone strategy, but it's also a very intentional normalization of things that were previously completely
Mm-hmm.
unacceptable, right? So it is amazing to me that you can do something as illegal
Mm-hmm.
as buy an election. Like that is what Elon tried to do. He tried to buy an election
Mm-hmm.
and he still lost, which I don't think we focus on enough. How big a loser do you have
He
to
is
be?
such a freaking loser.
Literally,
Loser.
truly, truly. And I think that we need to make that known to him on a much bigger scale,
Yeah.
frankly. But this is how cult-like this place is that he lost the election and then
Mhm.
he has
Oh
the
God.
absolute audacity to go on Twitter and be like, actually, I did that intentionally. And his whole crowd fell for it. They're like masterful gambit, sir. What gambit you lost, and now you're trying to convince yourself that somehow this is what you intended to do all along. He used the word positional gain. He said that we lost the election for positional gain. And I was like, damn, Elon's actually right for once. I used to think that he could have had no lower position in my mind, but now he's gone even lower than that. So he did,
Oh
in
my
fact,
God.
gain a lower position, according to me. Like, yeah, it's
I
truly
liked
incredible.
the gaslighting of this administration and the whole like MAGA, I don't want to call it a movement, MAGA cult is incredible. And I like to say that like every ex-boyfriend I've ever had has fully prepared me for this moment in American history because the gaslighting never ends. It never ends.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Also, I feel sad
Yeah.
for you about that, but yes,
Well,
there's a
whatever.
reason why they're exes.
There's
Yeah,
a
but
reason why they're exes, and I love my life right now.
yeah, but we've been talking about the ways in which the media controls information, the ways in which people are now starting to take action, the different discourse that exists around action.
Hmm.
And I want to be able to sort of offer people, okay, we've talked about protests, we've talked about voting, we've
Hmm.
talked about donating.
Hmm.
What are some other, I would say, non-conventional or untraditional ways that people can be taking action towards advocacy that they might not think of?
Oh, I have one
Yeah.
that I'm very excited about. The first thing that I would want to bring up, because it was like recent good news about someone we both know, is that
Mm-hmm.
our new people are choosing to run in elections, local elections, state elections, national elections. And we were excited because like people like Maxwell Frost, who's
Mm-hmm.
a congressional member from Florida, younger people are starting to run, which is a very exciting thing when it comes to like injecting energy into our old white man politics. So our
Mm-hmm.
friend Deja Fox just announced a campaign that she's running for Congressional District 7 in Arizona. We are so excited to help her with this campaign, but she is one example of many different women that are now getting into politics through organizations like Emerge, through organizations like Emily's List, whose sole purpose is to give women the skills that they need to run for office in any capacity. So, one thing that you can do is find out who these candidates are where you live and volunteer for their campaigns. And there's so many different capacities in which you can volunteer for a campaign. You can go to a campaign office and lick envelopes. And that is your contribution to the campaign because all of those envelopes will go out with mailers to people who maybe didn't know about that candidate. And it seems like a very small contribution that makes a huge impact. You could do door
Absolutely.
knocking, if you want. You can answer telephone call, you can do phone banking, but there's just a huge scale of volunteering that you can do for rising, powerful candidates, women or men, but we like the women. And I don't think people know like that there's so many different capacities that you don't just have to door knock, which can be intimidating for some
For
people.
sure. Like text banking is
Yeah.
actually a thing that lots of candidates do. And let's be
Oh.
honest, we all are on our phones,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of us love texting.
Yeah.
So you get a fixed script and you
Mhm.
just have to send it to a bunch of people and
Yeah.
then respond to those people if they try and engage with you. And I think that that could be not just an easy thing for some people to do, but probably also a learning experience, and be
Yeah.
like, hey, what are voters who are not like me thinking about what's going on in my own city, my
Mm-hmm.
own state? So yeah,
And
I
we're
think that's
saying that from experience. Most of the things we're suggesting we've done ourselves, but you and I participated in text banking with the Reproductive Freedom for All
for
campaign
Allison.
for
Yes,
Allison also
also
Brooks,
Brooks. Yeah.
who won in Maryland.
Yeah, hell yeah,
But
because of us right here. No, I'm
yeah,
kidding.
so, yeah.
I'm kidding. That was a joke. That
We
was a joke.
contributed
Allison is
to.
a badass.
But I can tell you for the text banking, it's so easy. You do it through like a software. You don't use your own phone number. Now, at no point is your personal phone number associated with it. It's through like online software where you're given a script of what to say. You're given a script of what to do with a positive response and a negative response. And you can send out like hundreds of text messages in a few minutes. And I know people are like, oh my God, I hate getting those fucking text messages during campaigns. But there is a reason why campaigns invest in text banking. It's because for a lot of Americans, it works for people who are not clued into what's going on day to day.
Yes. And I want to say, there's this organization called Navigator, which
Oh,
collects
yeah.
research on trends around voting and trends around people's like leans on particular topics. Even I have a relationship with them, and we often attend these like seminars that they do where they're sharing their results. And one of the interesting things that they recently talked about was that a lot of Americans have never taken an action simply because, in the words of those own people, no one has ever asked them to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that kind of caught me off guard because I was like, wait, you're telling me that making a simple request is what these people are waiting for? And that's the role that you could play. Like if you are the texter, you are the one who is asking them to do that. You
Mm-hmm.
are the one who's asking them to join something. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I really do want people to understand that there's a lot of different ways that you can potentially get involved. Like if you like event planning, that's something that you could help out with.
Mm-hmm.
If you enjoy, just yapping,
Mm-hmm.
go online and talk about a
Go
candidate. Like,
yap. Go yap
yeah.
about these things.
Yeah. So what I mean is that there's something for everyone typically. And if you've been feeling a little bit overwhelmed or like you're like, I don't have the capacity to donate right now, whatever it is, but I want to get involved, this is volunteering with your local candidates is an excellent idea.
Mm-hmm.
I would say another one that is something you can actually just do on your own time at home, but is actually an action item that people don't realize is what we've been talking about this whole time, which is auditing your media sources. So
Mm-hmm.
start shaping your algorithms online, your media consumption in a way that is productive for you. And I know a lot of people will be like, well, if I only listen to one side of things, then like that's not real. Unfortunately, the truth is that in the US, even mainstream media is heavily biased in one
Mm-hmm.
direction or another, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would encourage people, if they're not already doing so, to start looking at sources like creator journalists
Mm-hmm.
or like news accounts or accounts like ours, which
Mm-hmm.
theoretically people listening to this podcast are already tuned into. But there's more people like us who are focused on particular issues and are trying to present the reasoning about bills that are currently existing and things like that. So I would say start to craft your algorithm in a way that is simultaneously allowing you to stay informed, which is another action item. Stay
Mm-hmm.
informed. Don't disengage just because Steve Bannon wants you to, because trust me, that is what Steve Bannon wants. And Steve
Mm-hmm.
Bannon is a class A asshole.
Mm-hmm.
But audit your media sources in a way that your algorithm is now full of things that both give you joy and also maybe give you
Mm-hmm.
stress. But that's a way of allowing yourself to continue to identify the pieces of things that will galvanize you towards taking action,
Yeah. I
So
think
that's another one.
people also like don't realize even the small ways that a lot of media can be biased. I mean, Fox News is definitely like the most biased towards conservatives. We know that.
Fox News is elder abuse at this point,
Right.
just truly.
This isn't the greatest example because it's Fox News, but I'll give it anyway because it's like a very minuscule example of like, I feel like subliminal influence. They took the stock ticker off of their running headline that goes at the bottom of the screen all the time because
Mm-hmm.
the stock market was crashing yesterday.
And
And
they've
so
never done that before.
they've never done that before. And so, like, I know most of our audience is not watching Fox News anyway. It's not the point that it's Fox News, it's that mass media companies can make these small changes to make you tune out to things that are actually really important by just removing the stock ticker so that you can't see how bad the stock market is crashing.
Just to be clear, we're not shitting on mainstream media, and
Mm-mm.
we're not saying that individual creators are the be all and end all of information
Yeah.
consumption. No, that's not at all what we're saying. What we are saying is that the sources that you listen to are what will shape how you see the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are someone who is interested in being able to take a more justice oriented lens or a more equity oriented lens towards your information consumption, there are ways to do that that is not mainstream media. And I think that it's always important, we throw back to last episode, to read beyond the headline of something as well, because
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to understand like what this source is, where it's coming from, and what it's trying to tell you.
Yeah.
So I do think that this is something that people can do for themselves to stay attuned in the ways that they want to be and frankly need to be if we're going to survive as a group and get through this and demand the change that needs to happen.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important point for us in a way that I want to continue to encourage others to do their own research and their own work because oftentimes not just people who follow us on social media, but also people in our own networks, our friends, sometimes our family who we love dearly, will come and say, I heard this thing happening in reproductive health, like what's happening? What can I do? And I am always happy when people want to get more involved. But I think what people miss when they ask us questions like this is that we don't have any special superpowers about where we get our information from. Yes, we have degrees, yes, we have credentials, but as far as like current events and news go, we are pulling from the same places that, everybody else has access to. And we also have full-time jobs, so we're not like reading the news all day, every day. But I really want to encourage people to feel like they are equipped with the skills to do the same research that we're doing as much as like their personal capacity and their personal networks allow them to in a way that they are comfortable with their friends. And I am always happy for my friends to come to me, so I'm not like changing course in any way, but all of the information is out there. We just need the confidence and the passion and the commitment to go find it ourselves.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Women in America. Whether it's protesting with your community, volunteering for local candidates, auditing your media sources, or simply finding ways to stay informed, we hope that you're now feeling energized to take action. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your network, and don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. For additional resources, follow us on social media at Gemma_talks. See you next week.